Let's get started. I was halfway through dinner when my father slid an envelope across the table. It landed right next to my plate, a neat white square with my name written in bold, deliberate strokes. My first thought was that it was some kind of invitation, maybe an event, a wedding, something completely normal. But when I picked it up and saw the numbers printed on the paper inside, my stomach twisted. $79,800. I blinked, rereading the figure, then the words above it. Invoice for parental expenses. A short laugh slipped from my lips before I could stop it. What the hell is this? I asked, looking up. My parents sat across from me, their faces calm, eerily composed. My younger brother, George, was sprawled on the couch in the living room, watching TV, barely sparing us a glance. My father folded his hands together and met my gaze with unsettling steadiness. "It's what you owe us," he said. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. "Excuse me? You're a grown man now," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "It's time you started giving back. Raising a child is expensive, and we've spent nearly $80,000 on you over the years. That's not even counting the real total. We're giving you a discount." Mom nodded, her expression soft but firm. "Be grateful we're only charging you this much. If we included everything, it would be a lot more." I set the paper down carefully, trying to keep my voice even. "You're joking." Either of them laughed. I swallowed, glancing between them, searching for some hint that this was a prank, a cruel joke designed to test my reaction. But their faces remained serious, expectant. I turned to George, expecting him to roll his eyes, maybe mutter something sarcastic. Instead, he just shrugged. "It's fair," he said, lazily flipping the channel. My grip tightened on the edge of the paper. I felt a slow burn creep up my spine, disbelief morphing into something heavier. "You..." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "You seriously think I owe you for existing?" Dad let out a sigh, like he was disappointed that I wasn't catching on. "We provided for you. A roof over your head, food, clothes, education. Basic parenting responsibilities." I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. He frowned. "That doesn't mean it was free. You're successful now. You have your own business, a stable life. Meanwhile, we spent decades supporting you. The least you can do is show some appreciation." Mom reached for my hand, her eyes pleading. "We don't want to fight, sweetheart. This is just a way for you to acknowledge everything we've done for you." I yanked my hand away. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. I worked my ass off to be where I was today. I put myself through college, took on extra shifts, learned to survive without asking them for anything. I had assumed, stupidly, that they'd be proud of that they'd see me as independent, capable. Instead, they saw me as a debt waiting to be collected. I took another look at the invoice. Room and board, groceries, medical expenses, even gas money for rides when I was a teenager. Every single thing they had ever provided for me, down to the smallest detail, had a price tag attached. I forced a breath through my teeth. "You expect me to pay you back for raising me? Are you serious?" Dad's jaw tensed. "You always were the selfish one." Something inside me cracked. A slow, burning rage, years in the making, finally snapped its restraints. I sat back, my lips curling into something close to a smile. "Okay," I said too calmly. Dad's expression flickered. Mom hesitated. Even George looked up from the TV, his brows drawing together slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Since we're putting a price on things," I continued, scrolling through my documents, "let's talk about what you owe me." Mom's face paled. Dad's eyes darkened. And that was before they even saw the total. I should have seen this coming. The moment that invoice landed in front of me, the moment my father spoke as if my existence was a financial burden, everything clicked into place. It wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the final act in a long-winding script, one that had been playing out my entire life. Because in my family, love was never unconditional. Everything came with a price. And I was the only one who had to pay it. Growing up, I learned quickly that nothing in my house was truly given freely. If I wanted something, I had to earn it. Not just in the way most kids did, by doing chores or proving I was responsible, but by justifying, down to the last detail, why I deserved it. My younger brother George never had that problem. It wasn't always blatant. At least, not at first. My parents probably wouldn't have even admitted it to themselves. But little things added up over time, subtle shifts that shaped the way our family worked. When I was 8, I asked for a new pair of shoes because mine were too tight. Mom frowned, looking at my feet. "They still have some life in them. Can't you wait a little longer?" I nodded. Of course, I could wait. I knew better than to argue. A few weeks later, George, 6 years old at the time, came home crying because a kid at school had made fun of his sneakers. The very next day, Mom took him shopping for brand new ones. When I asked why, her response was simple. He needs them for soccer. I didn't say anything. I just made a habit of stretching my toes inside my too small shoes, willing them to last a little longer. This logic followed me into my teenage years. When I was 14, I asked if I could get an allowance like some of my friends. My parents looked at me like I had just asked for a new car. You should be grateful for what you have. Dad said, if you want money, you can work for it. So I did. I started mowing lawns in the neighborhood, taking any odd job I could find. Every dollar I made, I held onto it tightly because I knew I wouldn't get more. That same year, George got an allowance, $20 a week. When I brought it up, Mom sighed, as if I was being difficult. Well, he's younger than you, she said. He needs a little help managing his money. But I never got an allowance when I was younger. I pointed out. Exactly. Dad cut in. And look how responsible you turned out. It was always the same answer. I was capable. I was independent. I could handle myself. George, on the other hand, was fragile. He needed help. And for some reason, that meant he got everything handed to him, while I was left to fend for myself. By the time I turned 16, I had given up hoping for fairness. I had been working part-time for nearly a year, saving up for a car. I knew my parents weren't going to buy me one, and I wasn't about to ask. But a small, stupid part of me still held on to the hope that maybe they'd at least help. Then, a week before my 16th birthday, George turned 14. And my parents, who had never so much as offered to pitch in for my car, bought him a brand new gaming console. I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. I didn't say anything. Not at first. But Dad must have noticed something in my face because he clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll see about getting you a car in a couple of years, once you've proven you can handle the responsibility." I wanted to laugh. Responsibility? I asked. I've been working part-time for a year. I'm paying for this myself. Dad just gave me a knowing smile, like I was being naive. Exactly. And that's why we know you can handle it on your own. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. That was the moment I realized it wasn't about independence at all. It was about expectations. They expected me to manage on my own. They expected me to struggle. George, he was different. He was always still learning, still growing. He always had an excuse. It wasn't just about money. It was about everything. When George forgot about an assignment and failed the test, Mom comforted him. It happens to everyone, sweetie. When I missed one homework deadline, Dad told me I was being careless and needed to grow up. When George got caught drinking at 17, Dad laughed and said, "Boys will be boys." When I came home 5 minutes past curfew, I was grounded for 2 weeks. It was a pattern. A deeply ingrained, inescapable pattern. The night I bought my first car, a beat-up second-hand sedan that I had worked tirelessly for, I pulled into the driveway feeling proud. I had done it. On my own. No handouts. No help. Mom and Dad barely acknowledged it. "Good job," Mom said vaguely, already distracted. I found out why a few days later. They had just bought George a brand new bike. I should have cut them off years ago. But part of me, the stupid part, kept hoping things would change. That they would finally respect me. That they would see me as an equal, instead of an investment they had never planned to cash in on. But I was wrong. They never saw me as their son. I was just a debt. And now, as I sat at that dinner table, staring at the invoice they had just handed me, I felt something inside me snap. They had no idea. No idea what was coming next. I stared at the invoice again, the numbers blurring together as my grip tightened around the paper. $79,800. An itemized list of every cent my parents had ever spent on me. Rent, food, clothes, medical expenses, even gas money for rides they had given me when I was a teenager. It was absurd. It was insulting. And yet, as I looked up at my parents, waiting with that same quiet entitlement, I realized they were completely serious. "You expect me to pay you back for being your child?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Dad didn't even blink. "We provided for you. You have a stable life now. It's time you showed some appreciation. By paying you back." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "You do realize that's not how parenting works, right?" Mom sighed, rubbing her temples like I was being deliberately difficult. "Sweetheart, we're not asking for much. We just think it's fair. You're doing well for yourself and we. And you what?" I cut in. "You need money? Is that what this is about?" Dad exhaled to his nose, clearly losing patience. It's not just about the money. It's about responsibility. You benefited from everything we provided for you. We invested in you, and now it's time for you to give back. I almost laughed again, but there was no humor in it. I glanced at George, who was still slouched on the couch, half watching us. He looked bored, like this whole conversation was a waste of his time. You think this is normal? I asked him. He shrugged. I mean, it's not a big deal. Just pay them something and move on. I stared at him, barely able to process his indifference. Of course, he didn't see the problem. He had never been asked to earn anything in his life. Unbelievable, I muttered. I turned back to my parents. Let me get this straight. You're asking me to pay back every cent you ever spent on me, like I was some kind of investment. Dad nodded. Exactly. But George doesn't have to pay anything. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom shifted uncomfortably. George what? I snapped. What's the excuse this time? He's younger? He needs more time? He's still figuring things out. Dad's jaw tightened. This isn't about George. Of course it isn't. I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. Because it never is it? George got everything handed to him. I had to fight for every scrap. And now, after years of watching them bend over backward to support him, while expecting me to stand on my own, they had the audacity to act like I was being ungrateful. My fingers curled around the invoice, crumpling the edges. You don't see anything wrong with this? With the fact that you're demanding money from one son while the other gets everything for free? Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't about playing favorites. I barked out a laugh. That's exactly what it is. Dad pushed his chair back, standing up. Look, he said, his voice cool and even. If you don't want to pay the whole amount, we can negotiate. But we expect you to contribute something. I blinked, stunned into silence for a moment. Negotiate? I repeated. He nodded. We're willing to lower the total if you at least agree to a payment plan. I felt my stomach twist. They weren't just expecting me to pay. They genuinely thought this was a business transaction. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding repayment. And that's when it hit me. They didn't see themselves as parents. They saw themselves as creditors. And I wasn't their son. I was a debt to be collected. A slow, cold realization settled over me. They didn't expect me to fight this. They thought I would just accept it, either out of guilt, or because I didn't want to cause a scene. They assumed I was still that obedient kid who kept his mouth shut and did what was expected. They had no idea. No idea what I had been holding on to for years. No idea what was coming next. I took a deep breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my phone. Since we're putting a price on things, I said, my voice steady, let's talk about what you owe me. Mom's face paled. Dad's expression darkened. And that was before they even saw the total. I placed my phone on the table, the screen glowing with cold, undeniable proof. Here, I said, my voice steady. If we're treating this like a transaction, then it's only fair that we settle all outstanding debts. Mom's hand hovered over the table, hesitating. Dad leaned forward, his jaw tightening. George, for the first time, actually sat up from the couch, his usual smug disinterest cracking into something closer to curiosity. Slowly, Dad reached for the phone. He barely glanced at the numbers before his expression shifted, his mouth pressed into a tight, thin line, his eyes flicking toward Mom. She wasn't as composed. She went pale, gripping the edge of the table as if steadying herself. What's this? She asked, but her voice was weak, uncertain. I folded my arms. That, I said, is every cent you've ever taken from me. Every loan you forgot to pay back. Every expense you dumped on me when you were supposedly struggling. And I tapped the screen, scrolling down. The inheritance from Grandpa that mysteriously disappeared before I ever saw a dime of it. Dad's nostrils flared, his grip on my phone tightening. He looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Not regret. It was closer to anger, the kind that comes when someone realizes they no longer have control. You don't understand, he said, his voice clipped. That money went toward the family. Did it? I shot back. Because I remember exactly how it happened. You called me out of the blue, panicked, saying you were in a tough spot. You needed help with the mortgage, just for a few months, just until things got better. I didn't even hesitate. I wired you the money the same day. Mom swallowed hard. And we were grateful, sweetheart. I held up a hand. Let me finish. She fell silent. I took a breath, my grip tightening against the table's edge. I never asked for that money back. I assumed stupidly that you were struggling, and I wanted to help. But what did I find out a month later? I looked straight at Dad. that you weren't behind on mortgage payments at all. That money went toward a down payment on a new vacation timeshare. Dad's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. I let out a short, bitter laugh. A timeshare. And yet, here you are, demanding nearly 80 grand from me because you think I owe you for raising me? Dad set my phone down slowly, deliberately. We did what we thought was best, he said, his voice dangerously calm. We raised you. We gave you a home. And yes, we made sacrifices for you. I raised an eyebrow. Sacrifices? Yes, he snapped, his patience fraying. Do you think money just appeared out of nowhere? Do you think raising a child is easy? We worked hard to provide for you, and now that you're successful, you act like you don't owe us anything? I leaned forward. I don't. His lips curled, his knuckles widening. I pointed to my phone. You want to talk about debts? Fine. Let's settle everything. That inheritance was meant for me, wasn't it? Mom's face crumpled. She turned to Dad, as if hoping he would have an excuse, an explanation, something to smooth over the ugly truth. But he had nothing, because we all knew the answer. Grandpa left it for me. I continued. I found out years later. Uncle Ray told me the truth. That money was mine. You took it without telling me and spent it on yourselves. That's not fair. Mom whispered, her voice thick. Not fair? I let out a sharp breath. You took my savings. You drained my inheritance. You guilt-tricked me into bailing you out when I was barely scraping by myself. And now, after all of that, you think I owe you? Silence. For the first time, I saw something flicker in Dad's eyes, something beyond the usual cold dismissal. It wasn't remorse. It was calculation. He was trying to figure out his next move, trying to find a way to turn this around, to make me feel guilty, to make me second-guess myself. But I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't the desperate teenager who still thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, they would finally see me as worthy. I was done playing their game. I took my phone back, sliding it into my pocket. You owe me over 100 grand. I said. You have two choices. Either we forget about all debts, yours and mine, or I start legal proceedings to take back what's mine. Mom let out a strangled gasp. Legal proceedings? Dad's expression darkened. You wouldn't dare. I met his gaze without flinching. Try me. The silence stretched. I could see the battle playing out in his head. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could bully me into submission, guilt-trip me into handing over a check just to keep the peace. But the moment he realized that wasn't going to happen, something shifted. His shoulders squared. His face hardened. If you walk up that door, he said, his voice quiet but heavy, then you're cutting yourself off from this family. There it was. The final play. The last, desperate attempt to control me. I let out a slow breath. I think we both know that already happened a long time ago. Mom made a noise, half gasp, half sob, but I didn't let myself feel anything. I stood, pushing my chair back with slow, deliberate movements. I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and then I walked to the door. I expected them to yell, to throw more guilt my way, to say something, anything, to try and pull me back in. But they didn't. They just sat there staring. I opened the door, stepped outside, and let it close behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in slow, measured waves. The house behind me loomed in the rearview mirror, but I didn't look back. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Come back inside. Let's talk. Don't do this. Then another from Dad. Think carefully about your next move. This will have consequences. I scoffed, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. Of course, they were trying to regain control, to twist the situation into something where I was the problem, the unreasonable one. They weren't sorry. They weren't ashamed. They were afraid. Not of losing me, but of losing their grip on me. And for the first time, I realized I had something they never expected. Leverage. I spent the next few days combing through old emails, bank transfers, even digging up paperwork from years ago. It wasn't hard to find the proof. The $115,000 wire transfer I sent them when they claimed they were in a financial crisis. The withdrawal from my savings account, labeled under my father's name, the one they promised was just temporary, to help George get on his feet. The inheritance from my grandfather, which should have been split equally between George and me, but which somehow vanished entirely into my parents' pockets. And then there were the messages. Dad, we'll pay you back as soon as we're stable. Don't worry about it. Mom, this is just a loan, sweetheart. We're family. We'll always take care of each other. Except they hadn't taken care of me. They had used me. I reached out to my uncle, Ray, my mom's older brother. He was the only one in the family I still trusted. When he answered, his voice was cautious. "Hey kid, what's going on?" I hesitated for only a second before I told him everything. The invoice. The money. The inheritance. The legal action I was planning. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he sighed. "I was wondering when you'd finally put the pieces together," he said. My stomach clenched. "You knew?" "Not everything," he admitted. "But I knew your parents took the inheritance that was meant for you. When your grandfather passed, he left equal amounts for both you and George. But when I asked about your share, your mom told me you agreed to let them manage it for you." I let out a bitter laugh. "I never agreed to that. I figured," he said. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder." I swallowed down the anger rising at my chest. "Is there anything I can do?" Another pause. Then, in a lower voice, he said, "Actually, yeah, there might be." I met with a lawyer a week later, someone Ray had recommended. She specialized in estate disputes and financial fraud. After going through my documents, she leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses. "You have a case," she said simply. Relief and tension hit me at the same time. "But it won't be easy," she continued. "Your parents will fight this. They'll claim it was all voluntary, that you gifted them the money. The inheritance is trickier, but if we can prove that they misappropriated funds meant for you, we might be able to reclaim part of it." I exhaled slowly. "How long will this take?" "Could be months. Maybe longer. But if you're willing to go through with it, we can start immediately." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." The legal notice was served within a week. And then the storm began. First, Mom called me. I didn't pick up. Then Dad. Then George. Then the messages flooded in. "Mom, how could you do this to your own parents?" "Dad, you're making a huge mistake. This is going to ruin our family." "George, you're actually insane. You're tearing us apart over money?" Over money. That was the part that got me. Because they were the ones who had demanded I pay them for my childhood. They were the ones who had taken everything from me without a second thought. But now that the tables had turned, they suddenly wanted to act like I was the villain. I ignored them. Instead, I focused on the legal proceedings. Through my lawyer, I learned that my parents were in deeper financial trouble than they had let on. They had maxed out their credit cards, were behind on mortgage payments, and this was the kicker, had already taken out loans against the inheritance money they had stolen from me. They weren't just bad parents. They were financial disasters. And now that they couldn't milk me for more, their house of cards was crumbling. 2 months after the lawsuit was filed, Mom showed up at my apartment. She was crying. I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't do this. We're family." I clenched my jaw. "Were we family when you handed me that invoice?" She flinched like I had slapped her. "That was a mistake," she said quickly. We weren't thinking. We just thought, you thought I would just hand over the money." I finished for her. Just like I always did. Tears streamed down her face. "We're going to lose everything." I felt nothing. No guilt. No sympathy. Just a quiet, hollow certainty that this was the price of their choices. "You already lost me," I said. "Everything else is just consequences." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I waited a few seconds, then stepped back inside and closed the door. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the powerless kid fighting for scraps of love. I felt free. We settled out of court. They didn't have the money to pay me back in full, so they had to sell off assets. Their vacation timeshare? Gone. Their second car? Gone. They even had to downsize their house. George was furious. "You ruined our family." He spat when we finally spoke again. I met his glare without flinching. "No, George. They did." He stormed off, and I knew, without a doubt, that whatever remained of our relationship was dead. And I was fine with that. Because for the first time, I wasn't the one sacrificing. I wasn't the one being used. I had stood up for myself. And I didn't regret it. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the most brutal yet necessary ways. Some of the most painful experiences shape us into the people we were meant to become. The story of my family, my parents' betrayal, and the battle I had to fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine was not just about money. It was about power, control, and the realization that sometimes, the people we expect to love and protect us the most are the ones who take the most from us. Walking away from them was not just about financial independence. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, about refusing to be a pawn in a game I never agreed to play. And in doing so, I learned some of the most important life lessons that I will carry with me forever. One of the first lessons this entire ordeal taught me was that family is not an obligation, it's a choice. Society places an enormous weight on the idea of unconditional family loyalty. We are raised to believe that no matter what happens, family comes first. We are taught that we owe our parents gratitude for bringing us into the world, for raising us, for providing us with the basics of life. But what happens when that relationship is built on debt rather than love? What happens when family is just another word for people who take and take without ever giving back? The harsh truth is that being biologically related to someone does not mean you owe them a lifetime of servitude. Family should be built on mutual respect and care, not coercion, guilt, and financial blackmail. The idea that children owe their parents for the cost of raising them is absurd. Parents choose to have children. It is their responsibility to provide for them. The moment they start treating that responsibility like an investment that requires repayment, they cease to be parents and become something else entirely: creditors, manipulators, users. I spent years believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I proved myself, if I showed that I was worth it, my parents would finally see me as an equal. But love is not something that should be earned. It is something freely given. And the moment you have to start paying for it, it is no longer love. Another lesson I learned is that people will always take advantage of you if you let them. I used to think that if I gave enough, if I helped enough, my parents would finally see my value. I sent them money when they needed it. I covered their expenses. I never asked for anything in return. And yet, when they handed me that invoice, they didn't see someone who had sacrificed for them. They saw someone they could still extract more from. That is the nature of users. They do not recognize generosity as kindness. They recognize it as weakness. They do not appreciate sacrifice. They expect it. And when you finally put up a boundary, when you finally say no, they react not with guilt or self-awareness, but with anger. Because to them, you were never a person. You were a resource. And resources are not supposed to say no. This brings me to another painful but crucial lesson. When you set boundaries, expect people to be angry. My parents' reaction to my refusal to pay their so-called debt was not sadness or regret. It was rage. They felt entitled to my money, to my compliance, to my continued sacrifice. When I finally stood up for myself, they acted as if I was the one who had betrayed them. That's the thing about boundaries. The people who benefit from your lack of them are the ones who will fight the hardest against them. They will call you selfish. They will say you are overreacting. They will try to make you feel guilty. But that is just another manipulation tactic. Saying no is not selfish. Refusing to be used is not cruel. It is self-preservation. And anyone who tries to make you feel bad for putting yourself first is someone who never cared about you in the first place. Another hard truth I had to accept was that justice is not always about revenge, but about reclaiming your own power. Taking legal action against my parents was not about destroying them. It was not about revenge. It was about taking back what was mine. They had spent years convincing me that I had to struggle alone while George was handed everything. They had stolen from me, lied to me, manipulated me, and then expected me to pay for the privilege of being their child. Walking away was not enough. I had to make sure they never had the chance to do it again. And in doing so, I realized that justice is not about punishing those who hurt you. It is about ensuring they never have the chance to hurt you again. Through all of this, I also learned that forgiveness is not always necessary. Society tells us that to move on, we must forgive. That to heal, we must let go of our anger. But some betrayals do not deserve forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to simply patch over with time. And that is okay. Moving on does not mean pretending the pain never happened. It means accepting it, learning from it, and using it to build a better life for yourself. Forgiveness is only meaningful when it is given freely, not when it is expected as an obligation. I do not forgive my parents. And I do not have to. I have made peace with that. One of the most empowering lessons I gained from this experience is that you do not have to play the role you were assigned. My entire life, I was cast in the role of the responsible one, the self-sufficient one, the one who did not need help. And I played that role well. I took care of myself. I worked hard. I succeeded despite the obstacles placed in my way. But the downside of being the strong one is that people stop offering you help. They assume you will figure it out on your own. They do not see the burden they place on you, because you never complain. For years I accepted that this was just my role in the family, that it would never change. But roles are not destiny. Just because someone expects you to be the giver does not mean you have to keep giving. Just because someone assumes you will always be there does not mean you cannot walk away. You are allowed to break free from the expectations others place on you. You are allowed to be something more. Perhaps the most liberating lesson of all was that peace is better than being right. Winning the lawsuit, reclaiming my inheritance, forcing my parents to face consequences for their actions, it felt good. But the true victory was not in proving them wrong. It was a knowing that I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed them at all. Letting go of the need to be understood, the need to be vindicated, was the most freeing thing I have ever done. I do not need them to admit they were wrong. I do not need them to see my side of the story. I do not need their validation. I am free. And that is all that matters. At the end of it all, I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away. Not everyone gets a happy ending with their family. Some relationships are too toxic to fix. Some wounds never heal. And that is okay. There is strength in choosing yourself. There is power in saying no. There is freedom in refusing to be used. The past cannot be changed. But the future? That belongs to you. And no one has the right to take that away. Subscribe now and turn on the bell so you never miss a story. Let's get started.